Multiple channels and websites have been teasing us about the Nikon Z6 III. They've been doing so for 2 years now. And then late last year, Nikon rumors said that Nikon might be releasing a new low-resolution variant of the Z9 called the Z9H. So Nikon customers will have a new camera soon. But which one will it be? The Nikon Z6 III or the Nikon Z9H? Well, stick around after this short message for all the details. But first, subscribe to stay up to date on the latest camera news. And for all the minor news stories, all those news stories not quite big enough to have their own separate video, follow me on X, formerly known as Twitter. Nikon registered a new camera on January the 8th, 2024. That's just yesterday. It has a 5.1 gigahertz Bluetooth support and is identified by the moniker N2214. When a camera company registers a new camera, regardless of where it's being registered, we can usually expect an announcement somewhere between 1 to 3 months. So, is this the Nikon Z9H, a variant of the Nikon Z9 with half the resolution of the Nikon Z9 at around 22 to 24 megapixels? Or is it the much anticipated, the long promised Nikon Z6 III? Well, according to Nikon rumors, we're getting close to the Nikon Z6 III. So Nikon rumors believes that this camera that's being registered is the Nikon Z6 III, not a variant of the Nikon Z9. And when Nikon rumors put out that story about this variant of the Nikon Z9, they weren't exactly sure how reliable and credible the information is. So, Nikon Z6 III. Sorry, I can't help but laugh. I mean, how long have we been promised this camera? It's going back some 2 years now, right? We had various sources telling us that the Nikon Z6 III was imminent, how to fly. We've seen it on various other rumor sites, and all along, Nikon Rumors has been saying, well, hold on a minute here, there's nothing credible on that at all. But now, finally, here we are, January of 2024, and it looks like the Nikon Z6 III might not be too far away. And this right here is the Nikon Z6 II. Now you might be asking, why on earth am I showing you an older camera? Well, that's because I'll use this to forecast what we can expect to see in the Nikon Z6 III and use this as a baseline. So why am I coming up with my own baseline of the Nikon Z6 III? Well, simply put, we don't have any leaked specifications for the Nikon Z6 III. Even though this camera is supposed to be 1 to 3 months out, we've got absolutely nothing. So the best thing to do is to take a look at the Nikon Z6 II and forecast a conservative baseline based on what we see with the competition, taking a look at the Panasonic S5 Mark II, at the Canon EOS R6 Mark II. All cameras within the same sort of price range, one a little bit more and one a little bit less. The Nikon Z6 II has a 24.5 megapixel sensor. It's a backside illuminated and it's not stacked, and I don't expect the Z6 III to be stacked either. But if we take a look at the resolution of the Canon EOS R6, the Mark II, well, it's 24 megapixels and that camera costs $22.99, currently on sale. The Panasonic S5 Mark II is also around 24 megapixels and it's also on sale but at a much lower price of $17.97. So we're not likely to see a big boost here. Now, Nikon could surprise us with a bump in resolution to 26, 28, or 30 megapixels, but based on what we're seeing with the competition, unless Nikon wants to make a big splash, I'm willing to predict somewhere between 24 and 26 megapixels. In terms of video, we've got 4K 30 frames per second with a Nikon Z6 II. It's pretty safe to say that the Nikon Z6 III will at least do 4K at 60 frames per second. But if we take a look at the competition, the Panasonic S5 Mark II, it can deliver 6K up to 30 frames per second. And again, that's at a price lower than the Z6 II at $17.97. 6K would certainly be nice, but at a bare minimum, we can expect to get 4K up to 60 frames per second, but don't expect 4K at 120 frames per second. 120 frames per second is certainly expected and possible in 1080, but to get 120 frames per second, most often we're looking at spending a whole lot more, like the Nikon Z8 at around $3,900, the Canon EOS R5. It's pretty rare to see 120 frames per second, and certainly not expected at a price point somewhere between, well, $1,800 and $2,600. And we can also expect the autofocus system to improve, most likely enhanced by some sort of artificial intelligence or deep learning technology. And that X-Speed 6 processor is most likely going to be replaced in the Nikon Z6 Mark III with the X-Speed 7 image processor. And that would be the engine capable of pushing much higher continuous stills. 14 frames per second is nothing today. The much cheaper Canon R7 can do 30 frames per second. The Canon EOS R10, 23 frames per second. And the Canon EOS R6 Mark II, it can do 40 frames per second. And yes, if we're going to be honest with each other, the Canon EOS R7 and R10 can do 23 and 30 frames per second respectively, but that buffer is going to fill up after a second. But the Canon EOS R6 Mark II can do up to 40 frames per second raw and can do it for longer. So that's a pretty big deal. I would really expect Nikon to definitely boost up the continuous shooting speed between 20 and 30 frames per second. And with an X-Speed 7 image processor, it's certainly got the horsepower it needs to be able to do this. Now, the EVF is currently 3.6 megapixels. We see that in the Nikon Z8, the Nikon Z9. I don't really expect to see much of an improvement in the EVF. And of course, it's got dual memory cards. This might seem like a bit of a boring update, but this is a conservative forecast, something that I don't think is going to disappoint. Now, the Nikon could actually give us something better than this, but getting an X-Speed 7 image processor, I think that makes a lot of sense. Having a sensor that's around 24 megapixels also makes a lot of sense, and it's rather conservative. Although getting a boost to 26, 28, or 30 would really stand out against the competition, which is pretty much right around 24, 24.5 megapixels. And continuous shooting speed, well, I can't see Nikon sticking around 14 frames per second. They really need to push between 20 and 30 frames per second. The Canon EOS R6 Mark II can do 40 frames per second, but that camera costs quite a bit more at around $2,600. Unless Nikon does what Sony did and bumped the price of their camera up to $2,600, then we're playing in a slightly different ball game. But if we look at the Panasonic S5 Mark II, it can do 6K up to 30 frames per second in video. So the video resolution here could really punch and do really, really well. 4K, 60 frames per second is pretty well expected in 2024 at this price point. But in terms of 6K, 30 frames per second, that's much more impressive. And that's what we see with the Panasonic S5 Mark II. And again, on sale, $1,800, and the Canon EOS R6 Mark II is also on sale, $200 off at $2,299. So the other thing we got to wonder about is the price. And I think it makes an awful lot of sense to be right around $2,000 to $2,500, and depending on what Nikon bakes into this as to how high they can go in price. So I'm really curious to know what the final specifications are going to be. We should start to get leaks soon. If this camera is supposed to be coming out within 1 to 3 months, we should start getting leaks pretty soon, and maybe this story here and what Nikon Rumors is talking about might help shake the rumor tree just a little bit. But I'll admit, it is frustrating not having any leaked specifications, not having any leaked pricing, dates, or any sort of, well, even low resolution images. All we have at this point is that we have a camera that's registered, and that's it. It's not even 100% guaranteed that it is a Nikon Z6 Mark III, but Nikon Rumors this time around is saying, hey, the Nikon Z6 Mark III isn't far away. They're not talking about the Z9H or any other camera, so I think this is the best hope we've had for a refresh of the Nikon Z6 Mark II in an awfully long time. And if you're interested in purchasing any cameras that we've talked about in this video, such as the Nikon Z6 Mark II, the Canon EOS R6 Mark II, the Panasonic S5H, did I say the Panasonic S5H? I meant the Panasonic S5 Mark II or the Mark IIX. They're all on sale. There's a lot, I can't believe it. Since Black Friday, there's been some really incredible sales on. The Canon EOS R5 went from $500 off to that's its new low price right now. So who knows what other pricing we might have there by Canon. We see a lot of lenses on sale up to $500 off. If you're looking at buying a new camera now, and I've seen so many comments in the description, or not in the description down below, I've seen so many comments down below in various videos talking about how I'm tired of waiting for the Canon EOS R5 Mark II or the Nikon Z6 Mark III or whatever camera it is. Take a look at a lot of the sales out there. There's some pretty incredible bargains out there, and you're going to save yourself an awful lot of money if you pick up one of these older cameras. They still have some pretty incredible specifications. The Canon EOS R5, still 3.5 years old, is a highly capable camera. Look at all the lenses on sale. And the Sony, I think $700 off the A7 III. Pretty incredible deals there. So if you're looking at purchasing any of these cameras, lenses, or accessories, then please consider using my affiliate links down below in the description, these ones right here, because anytime you use these affiliate links, I get a small commission back, and that really does help support this channel. It's going to be a pretty interesting year. I can't believe we're in 2024 right now because we're getting so many cameras. The Canon EOS R1, the R5 Mark II, both cameras that I'm going to be purchasing, a whole bunch of lenses, and there might even be a big Sigma announcement for the Canon RF mount. 2 Nikon cameras coming, the Nikon Z6 Mark III, a variant of or a refresh of the Nikon Z9, a couple of Sony cameras. The A9 III has already been announced, but we're supposed to be getting a whole bunch of other cameras, vlogging cameras, FX cameras, and Panasonic. It's been 5 years since they released the S1 and the S1R, and just under 5 years for the S1H. We're due for a refresh there. We haven't even talked about Pentax and OM Systems, and we're not going to talk about them. Well, OM Systems might come out with a new camera, but Pentax, those guys are awfully quiet. They do some minor updates and refreshes, but I'm not expecting anything groundbreaking from them. But that's it for now. Don't forget to subscribe and choose all notifications if you want to stay up to date on all the latest camera gear, news, and rumors, specifically regarding the Nikon Z6 Mark III, which is really close to being announced, at least according to Nikon rumors. And of course, we have the Canon EOS R1, according to the Camera Insider, is going to be the next Canon camera that's going to start being teased very shortly, most likely sometime in February, along with a bunch of lenses, a huge, big Sigma RF announcement. And then of course we've got a bunch of cameras coming from Panasonic, from Sony. It's just going to be a crazy year. And also follow me on X, because quite often all those news stories that aren't quite big enough to have their own separate video, those get tweeted out. But that's it for now. Have yourself a great week, and we'll see you again soon.